been up to lately?
Not too bad. I'm just well, I woke up at maybe 3 o'clock in the morning because I had to go to the restroom, and I looked at the internet and I saw that it seems as though Biden's been declared the winner.
Yeah, as of this
So
recording.
of course there's still probably right. So but there's still a lot more that needs to happen, like such as the of votes, the election being certified,
Yeah.
and whatever recounts or whatever that might happen. So it was just interesting.
Yeah, it's also interesting to see how people are reacting as if, this is it feels like this is a lot of people's first election ever. Like they've never had this experience where the media projects the winner, which happens in every election. Like of the
Right.
votes never come in completely, and quite often like the media will project what the winner is before all the votes come in. I mean, it almost never happens where
Right. Right.
a winner isn't projected by the time all the votes are coming in. The only time in my memory that hasn't actually happened was in 2000 with the Bush versus Gore election, and that went on. That had to be decided by the Supreme Court.
It's a bit weird, honestly, I think, to even think about getting the Supreme Court involved in an issue like that. So that kind of baffles me why the Supreme Court would get involved with it. Like, I think the vote should speak for themselves. If literally we have at this point millions of people who are favoring one candidate over the other, it just why should four or five Supreme Court justices, why should they decide the outcome of an election? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the reason why is because the state in question, Florida, was basically not cut and dry. There was a lot of questions and a lot of challenges for the outcome, and when it came down to it, Florida is the one state that decided the winner in that case, and the Supreme Court had to come in and decide who actually won that state.
Yeah, I would think you would need to get into at least the 80 percentiles to where you could properly project one way or the other, just
Well,
because the
that
last
depends.
20% may wind up, getting skewed in certain counties.
Well, unless it doesn't, unless it's unlikely to do so.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. You never know. So probably between the 80 to 90%, I think you can get a pretty good estimation. So,
Like for
but
example,
I mean, if you want to be
states
technical,
like
you shouldn't.
states like California and states like say Arkansas can you don't even have to have uh you know you don't have to have 80% of the vote come in before you know who who those are going to go for, who those electorates are going to go to, because it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear where California is going to vote. It's pretty clear where Arkansas is going to vote. Texas was a big surprise because it was so close. They almost thought that it was going to turn to Biden. Um, Georgia is a huge surprise,
Yeah, I
and
was
Nevada
shocked
is
by
kind of
that.
a
I was
surprise.
actually shocked by like Virginia as well.
Virginia, well,
I mean, but if you're talking about states, you know, if you're talking about states, then you're right. It probably is not even necessary to have an election in California because we already know that that's going to be so overwhelmingly. I mean, you can make the call at 5% or 10%, but I'm just saying,
right,
on average, whenever you have closer races,
right.
you probably should wait till the 80, 90%. So I just really want to encourage listeners now and people from everywhere to this is a healthy part of democracy that we have one side win and one side lose and back and forth. And, the Republic has gone through 250 years and we're going to endure through this. So, let's accept the results once it's finalized and let's move on to heal as a nation. That's just my advice. You have any
And
advice to people listening?
yeah, I have advice. Let's get rid of the electoral college. If we didn't have the electoral college, we wouldn't be
Right.
going through all this, and we'd probably be paying more attention to Congress, because uh, Congress was going through big battlegrounds too, and it actually went more Republican now. Like, Congress is going more Republican. The Senate is still going to be held by Republicans. So it doesn't seem like, as far as government goes, and Congress is the highest office in the land. Everybody thinks it's the president, but Congress is the highest office in the land. Or it's the highest branch of government in the land. It actually is the government. The president just kind of runs certain things about the government, but it doesn't have the power that
Mm-hmm.
the government that Congress has. And I feel like this whole election, the presidential election, distracts us from Congress. And I know that during the midterms, nobody's going to give a crap, and things are going to get worse in Congress, because there's not a president, to be elected. So there's going to be a very little turnout. This is how it always happens.
Well, as many times as we disagree on things, I think we'd have to definitely agree on that point because it seems to undermine democracy in general.
So, Isaiah, you are a hardcore believer, and I am an atheist.
Absolutely.
Um,
Okay.
so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about what our beliefs are,
Okay.
what challenges we have to those beliefs, and we're going to finally decide once and for all: is there a God? I'm just kidding.
That's funny. That's a good. No, that was a good. That was a good lead in.
Yeah. So, thank you.
But actually, you know what? I know you're joking, but the reality is that people have been debating this for thousands of years, and the likelihood that any one debate is going to settle that one way or the other isn't likely. So, we're in a process of learning and understanding, and I mean, there's a lot of things I'm still trying to figure out. So, just have to have some humility along the way in understanding that.
Definitely. I don't really know how long I've been an atheist, but um,
Mm-hmm.
all I could probably honestly say that I've always been an atheist. I just kind of
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of been an atheist, even though I've never been like, oh, I'm an atheist, right? Because I was raised a Christian, and I've always had the pressure, basically, to believe that there's a God, and believe that certain things about God, like
Absolutely.
Jesus is the savior and all that stuff. And there was definitely a point in my life where I declared myself to be an atheist, and that that kind of kind of gave some of my friends uh, a sort of food for thought. And um, there was one particular friend who sort of became a devout Christian. And one night we were hanging out and having drinks and stuff, and she basically finally says to me, she goes, I am afraid that you're going to go to hell, and I don't want you to go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, why do you think I'm going to go to hell? And she goes, well, because you don't believe in God. And I'm like, okay, so if there's a God, he's going to send me to hell because I don't believe? And she's like, well, yeah. And she goes, I think it'd be best if you just go ahead and just said, I believe in God. It would be better for you to believe in God. And because, if you're wrong about there not being a God, then you're going to go to hell. But if you say you believe in your God and you're wrong about that, then nothing's going to happen. So it would be better for you to do that. So I thought about that, and I said to her,
That sounds like Pascal's wager.
right, yeah, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that. we'll get to Pascal's wager. It's
Hmm.
something, and I didn't know at this time. I didn't know at this time that this was Pascal's wager.
Right.
It's something I've been confronted with before by other people, but this was a very close friend of mine who was like, I'm afraid you're gonna go to hell. And I wanted to comfort her, and I wanted to like tell her, just to sort of soothe her and say, okay, yes, I believe in God, okay, just so she doesn't think that I'm gonna go to
Uh-huh.
hell. But ultimately, I was like, okay, but if I say I believe in God, it won't be true because it's not something I could just kind of flip a switch on, you know? I can't just suddenly decide that I believe in God.
Right. Right.
It's something that was like, so, and that's just kind of like one of the first times I was really confronted with a close friend. In the end, she kind of like, okay, finally just kind of accepted it. And I don't know how she feels about it now still. And it was kind of a intoxicated moment, if you know what I mean. What do you think about that?
I mean, I will say this: growing up as a minister's kid, your parents put a lot of pressure on you to believe, what they believe. I remember many times just questioning what they were saying, and they would get really upset with me that I would do that. But at the end of the day, I just really wanted to have an understanding of the faith. So I think when, if you're a believer with children, you want to teach them your values, then not allowing them to question things is going to really push them away. Because I think if I was allowed to have done that, uh, and not being looked at as being rebellious or whatever, and my parents, there's times they would get flat out angry at me and like yell at me, and I'm like I remember one time I was just like, how do we know that the Bible is the inspired word of God? And then they quoted the Bible. They're like, well, the Bible says that all scripture is inspired. And I was like, you're just begging the question here. Like, how do I know that that was inspired by God? But they got really flustered at me that I was questioning the reasoning behind it. That's one thing I'm very cautious with my daughters, that I want her to be able to explore faith and to be able to look into other religions. And because I remember I got really curious about Islam in my life, and I started going to a mosque and stuff and learning about it. And my mom just flat out said, like, in no uncertain terms, like, if you convert to Islam, like, we're not going to have a relationship. And I was just like, wow, like, really? Like my belief would change your thoughts on me, like, is it your relationship with me?
Hmm.
So it's one of those things that just baffled me I mean, it baffles me now as a believer and a father, because there's nothing my daughter would ever do that would ever cause me to not have a relationship with her.
Do
You know
you
what I mean?
think Christianity is an exclusionist religion? Would you say that it's a kind of a belief system that says that this belief is the right one, and if you choose a different belief system, then you're choosing the wrong one?
I will say this. So whenever I was questioning, that was one of those things that really got me, because I was like, how in the name of God could I possibly say that any other religion is wrong if I didn't go out and research them? I was just born into this, and now I'm supposed to accept it. So I remember that didn't sit very well with me then. And to a huge degree, it doesn't really sit well with me now, because I do know that there's people, I have been in many countries where the vast majority of the people, they're Muslim because their family's Muslim. They have the same kind of pressures that I had. They're not really given the same kind of choice. But if you're asking that, definitely some places where it seems that way. But I also do see that, so Christ made this sacrifice for us, and how exactly that's going to play out for everybody, like, I don't have all the answers to that question. Like, I do know that when Christ came and was preaching to people, the people that he was most often upset with were the religious people, and the people who didn't have the faith, their belief in God, that they, like, the, let's say, like the equivalent of like Muslims, they were showing faith that wind up baffling Jesus Christ many times. And this isn't once or twice or three times. It's many, many, many times that people who don't have faith in God, that they wind up understanding his message a lot more. That's like the whole point of the Good Samaritan parable. Whenever it's the one person who's not a believer who goes and winds up doing the right thing. So there's a place in the Bible where Jesus gives this analogy, and he says, if you have two brothers, okay, the father says to go doing this task, and one of the brothers says, okay, yeah, I'll go and do that task, and the other brother says, well, I'm not going to do the task. And then one of the brother that says, I'm going to do it, he doesn't wind up doing it after all. And the one who winds up saying, I'm not going to do it, he does the task. So then Jesus asked the question, he's like, well, who's justified in this situation? So many Christians have said they followed Jesus Christ, but they haven't lived out what he said to do. Many non-believers who don't follow the word, don't follow Jesus Christ specifically, but they live out what he said. So in the same way, you would say, well, who's the one really justified here? The person who claims on the outside that they're following Jesus Christ, or the person who doesn't, but they're still doing what Jesus said to do?
Let's get to the big question then, okay? I would say I'm an atheist mostly because I'm just unconvinced there that there needs to be any sort of God for the universe to exist. Would you say that you're convinced about that? That you're convinced that there needs to be a God? And why are you? And why would you be?
Oh, beyond
Why are
any
you
reasonable
convinced?
doubt.
What makes you convinced of that?
I'm convinced because I had an encounter with Jesus Christ that totally and utterly changed my life, and he wound up healing things about me that were just so utterly broken that I didn't think I could ever be fixed, and to the point to where I was in constant desire to commit suicide. And so I was divorced from my wife. My wife had left me because I was constantly cheating on her. I had, I was an alcoholic. Any drug that ever came in front of me, I used. Searched the world trying to find some kind of peace, and I did look into those other religions, and I did look for other answers, and I didn't find anything there. And ironically, when I stopped looking for God, he wound up finding me. I have experienced Jesus Christ in a very real way. I mean, I can tell you this: there's been multiple times, not only that he's spoken to me, but I've experienced like miracles right in front of my face. And so I'm talking about stuff getting materialized right in front of me. There's that I have as like a bit of proof from what I've experienced. And I think if I were to tell you some of these stories, unless you think I'm absolutely lying, there's no way you would not believe at least something is out there. Maybe you might not call it a God. Maybe you might call it some kind of force or law of attraction.
But you
But
think
you
it? You
you
think
wouldn't be
it's
able to reason
Jesus,
through
though?
these.
But you're saying Jesus
Well,
himself?
he spoke. I've spoken to him.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I was not a believer. I was either agnostic or atheist. I mean, actually, I would say I was more of a deist. On a personal level, I remember one time I was in South Korea, and I was hiking up this mountain, and for probably about 3 hours, I was hiking up on these boulders that were like the size of cars. I swear they were gigantic. And I remember just going up, and it felt like an eternity. And I remember thinking in my mind, like, okay, I don't want to serve God. I still want to drink. I still want to sleep around. But I'm like, I cannot for the life of me imagine all these boulders just magically appearing out of nothing. And so it was like, if I'm just going to be honest to myself, I can't foresee that happening. So this God, I don't want to know him. I don't want to serve him. I don't want to follow him. But I believe there's something out there. So I would say I was more of like a deist, you know?
And as we talked about before, a deist is a person who believes that there is a God that created the universe, but that God is not anything that we can really know anything about.
A deist is the bastard child of an theist and an atheist. It's an illegitimate stepchild who's just out there, like,
Yeah,
not really willing to commit to anything.
right. It's really hard to be able to make the case that you know anything about what what the what the right God is, if there is a God, or because you're always having to basically appeal to these revelatory cases or like scripture, which, goes into like basically circular logic. The scripture is true because the scripture says it's true. So you can understand, I personally think when it came to, the deists of the Enlightenment age, I feel like they were just covering their own
Uh-huh.
asses a lot. They I feel like they really wanted to say they were atheists, but they were living in a power structure that basically paid a lot of heed to the church as sort of a powerful entity in culture and in politics and everything like that. I can definitely understand the position of the deist, and I I would I would say that, like, definitely if a god exists, um, then there definitely is no way we can know, and there's no way that I can say that I know anything about that god other than that, oh, I had some sort of experience told me that gave me the feeling, gave me the, I had non-repeatable experience that I couldn't, that only proved anything to me, but I couldn't take that and give it to anybody and say, look, here's proof that God exists, right? It'd have to be a good story. It'd have to be a story that, a lot of people agree was true, which is a lot. I think a lot of how a lot of the stories in scripture kind of come about, that there's
Uh-huh.
a sort of an agreed upon narrative, and then it just gets believed, basically. Let's see, where was I going with this, though?
So that's the difference between, if that's what you're saying that you believe in, then that's the difference between a like a Spencerian agnostic, and Herbert Spencer.
Yeah.
So where you're saying either
Okay.
one way or the other,
Wait a minute.
hey, either I can know
No, I don't know Herbert Spencer. Who is that?
what, one of the agnostic philosophers who really put the idea of agnosticism, who defined more clearly what agnosticism might mean. And so
Okay.
what you have is you have two different forms of agnosticism. One is saying it's not possible to know, and the other one saying is, well, I just don't know. You're saying that it's not possible to know. That takes a lot of faith to say that it's not possible to know, unless, as you say, maybe God just comes and reveals himself to you. Then that's the only way.
Well, and the reason I
It
say
seems
it's
like
not
that's a stretch
possible to
in
know
itself
is
as
that
well.
a lot of the answers to a lot of the answers to the question, like we'll get to the problem of evil, right? A lot of the answers of the question, such as the
Sure.
problem of evil, is it seems evil to us because we can't know what God is doing. We can't know what the big plan really
Right.
is. That's a good answer to the problem of evil. And if that's the answer to the problem of evil, therefore we can't know anything about what God really knows or is, wants for us, or wants us to do. We're just guessing. We're just making a guess. We're having really strong feelings about it and saying, well, that's how I know. That's how I know what God is and wants, because I have a really strong feeling about it.
One thing in which you can argue about Christianity is at least it's a logical and consistent message where it has a framework where you can answer a question like that. Okay.
It
So I
does.
do think there is a very good answer, a response to that problem of evil. I don't really see it as a problem of evil at all.
Riddle me this.
Let's
All
hear it.
right.
Okay.
Would you
Yeah.
agree that God is all powerful, all good, and all knowing?
Yes.
Would you say that, right? Okay. So if this is what God
Yes.
is, God can't be real because evil things are happening in the world. People are suffering, innocent children are suffering. If God was all good and all powerful and knew everything that was happening all the time, God wouldn't let this kind of thing happen. So therefore, this God just doesn't exist. What say you?
So I want to present an argument that is actually based in Mormonism, though I'm not actually a Mormon myself. But I think if we think about thoughts of salvation, it would it can give us an enlightenment into one reason why pain and suffering might actually exist. Okay. So, according to the Mormon, and by the way, I'm totally not in favor of Mormonism, but let's just philosophically, we can understand this from their perspective. So, according to the Mormon perspective, is that everybody already existed in heaven. And the reason why we're here on this earth is because we're trying to ascend to God's status so that we could all be our own God and have our own planets and procreate, or well, I don't know, it's some funky stuff that they believe in, honestly. But if that were the case, let's just assume for a second that everybody was born in heaven. Okay. So now you're up there and everything's always perfect and there's no pain, there's no suffering, there's no sickness. Well, would you really appreciate heaven in those circumstances? And I would argue that there's no way you could possibly appreciate that. You would need to experience cold and loss and uncertainty, and you would need to experience that to have some kind of appreciation for what God gave you. So the Bible actually talks about the angels in heaven are jealous of like human beings because they never get to experience the plan of salvation and redemption. So in that sense, I think it's something necessary that we need to endure in this lifetime.
Evil is necessary for us to experience so that we know what good is when we experience it. The thing is that there are definitely, I can see that, and maybe I haven't thought about this before. I was like, okay, well, is there any case where a person experiences no good in life, or experiences no evil in life? Is there any case of anybody who experiences nothing but no suffering at all, or nothing but suffering? And I think that's definitely
So,
possible, likely.
no, would you accept $1,000 if I were to $1,000 to punch you square in the face?
Punch me in the face? $1,000
Yeah,
square in the face?
yeah,
I can imagine how some people might
yeah.
do that. I wouldn't. No.
Okay,
Uh,
would you accept $1,000,000 for me to shoot you in the foot?
no. No, I wouldn't.
Would you accept $1,000,000,000 for me to shoot you in the foot?
No. No, I would not.
You wouldn't.
Maybe this is just me, but
Okay,
I
that's fine.
but I can see how
So,
somebody might.
if God is a source of all goodness and justice and morality in the universe, then if whatever we are enduring is going to pay off in the next life, which see that's the kicker, is that Christians don't just say this is the only life that's going to happen. We also believe in an afterlife, and we don't believe that humans have a soul. Okay, we believe that we're souls that have physical bodies right now,
Right,
who
yeah.
are enduring this hardship so that it will
Ghosts in the
cleanse our souls
machine.
in some way. So you may or may not agree with that principle, but I mean, there's at least a logical foundation for it. So I don't believe that I'm believing in something that's not logical. So in saying, would you endure this X, Y, and Z punishment for certain rewards? Well, if you're going to get rewarded later on based on whatever we're enduring, in fact, the Bible even says that, like, we're going to get repaid for this suffering later on. So
Mm.
that's kind of, I understand why you might say, oh, well, you're wiggling your way out of the problem. But it makes sense to me. I accept it, and I've experienced a lot of hardships and a lot of loss, but I believe that my life is right now better because of it already in this lifetime. So, are you familiar with the story of Siddhartha, also known as the Buddha?
Buddha, yes.
Genesis of why he sought enlightenment. He was some kind of prince in India, and his father forbade him to see anyone who was sick or poor or whatever, and he kept him locked inside of the house, or the palace, I should say. And so what wound up happening is whenever he was like a teenager, he wound up just walking around and he wound up seeing pain and suffering. And it just was such a shock to him that there was actually this kind of pain in the world. So his whole thought of enlightenment and trying to achieve like nirvana is trying to transcend and get away from all of the, the suffering and pain. So that's the idea of nirvana, where none of that exists anymore, which we might call heaven.
I'm not sure that's what nirvana is. It's not a sort of an end of suffering. It's more of an acceptance of suffering in life. To have life is suffering. To live life and to have a tranquil life is to basically learn how to deal with the suffering, how to accept and deal with the suffering that's in your life and around your life. And the thing about the story of the Buddha is that like it went from there. It went from him wanting to escape suffering to seeking out suffering because he thought that seeking out suffering was going to bring him to nirvana. He would only eat like 1 grain of rice a day. He would basically starve himself, subject himself to torments, expose himself to the elements and stuff like that. But he ultimately found out that it was wrong to do that. That experiencing, subjecting himself to suffering is not the way to gain enlightenment. It's not the way to gain nirvana. It's more like accepting both the suffering and the pleasures and the goodness in life, because ultimately goodness and badness, these are all just kind of one thing, basically sides of the same coin.
So that's an interesting perspective. I actually did go down to learn about Buddhism inside of a temple here in Korea, and it's kind of funny because I'm a bald, and so the Zen master came out and he was like, "Oh, you would make a good monk," and like everyone just started laughing. He was
You
there.
you
So,
look just like
but
us.
but I asked him this question. I said flat out, I said, "How can you consider non-existence, which is what my perception of nirvana was? Because the only way you could actually not experience suffering would just be to not exist anymore." So I said, "How could you consider non-existence a positive thing?" And he flat out told me, he's like, "You're thinking about the situation wrong." He's like, "It's not that you don't exist, it's that you do exist." I guess in another plane, I guess you would have to say that you're able to, as he said, kind of what you're talking about is you just transcend it all to where I guess, okay, now you see all the negative as not as positive now. Which I mean, at the end of the day, it's not too different from what I think is as a Christian now. You know,
Well, let's
I
go
think there's a
on.
kernel of truth in there for Christianity.
Let's go on to Pascal's wager, because I think this whole thing you're talking about is basically you're doing something, or evil is worth going through, because ultimately you're going to end up in heaven and everything's going to be okay, right? And so as long as you believe in God and believe that God is real and accept, the only way you're going to get to heaven is to accept this particular personality as the savior of humanity, of mankind, and of basically. Well, let me ask you this, all right? Because I know there's different ways to interpret exactly what Jesus Christ is. Some interpret Jesus Christ as being sort of like the Son of God, but not really God. Or Jesus is part of a Trinity where the whole Trinity is God, but Jesus is only one part of that. Or other ones are just like, no, Jesus is God. Jesus is God that came down, and God came down to experience the suffering of mankind, and God decided that, hey, you know, okay. And so, what do you think? What is your interpretation of Jesus, the deification of Jesus?
I think most easily I would have to say I really don't understand the full nature of the Trinity, because what that does is it relies on extra logical thinking, which is actually they use in Buddhism to try to like distort logic. So, for example, they say things like, well, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Because you need two hands to clap. There's a logical fallacy behind it. So, if I were to ask you, well, who's the fourth member of the Trinity? Well, how are you going to answer that question? Because the Trinity requires having three members. As far as the nature of Jesus and the Trinity, I do think that in a sense, God wanted to come down and experience, human human suffering or whatever. If you're asking me how does that simultaneously exist in three different parts, yet one, all the arguments I have heard are really, really dumb because they say things like, well, it's like a banana. You push a banana in and it's three parts, or it's like water, it's ice, mist, and liquid. Well, that's drastically different than saying they're all individuals by themselves, but yet they're all the same. And how you even begin to understand that logic, it's outside of the realm of human logic. So if it is real one way or the other, I don't really know how to answer that question. It's like a Zen cone. If a tree falls in the middle of the woods, who hears it? Like, it doesn't make any sound. Like, how would you know? How would you know one way or the other?
Yeah. But what is it that you believe though? What is Jesus?
Jesus is my best friend. I mean, he's my savior. He's the person I look to for comfort.
But is he
Uh,
God? Is Jesus God?
someone who I strive. I think from the Bible, if you're going by what the Bible, I mean, I do believe he's God, but I do understand like a Jehovah's Witness who picks up the Bible and says, well, no, he's obviously not God because he's God's son. He's the Father's son. So how in the heck could he also be the Father and the Son? It doesn't compute with our logic. So how
Right.
exactly that relationship, I don't understand. Like, I really don't understand. If you're asking me that question, I just have to say I don't know. I really don't know.
So you don't. So
Should I
you're
flip the
you're
switch?
agnostic. You're agnostic about whether or not Jesus is God. So is what you're saying.
No, no, I didn't say I didn't say. I said I believe he's
You
God.
believe he's God, but
Well,
you
put it like
can't.
this.
You
Okay.
can't really. You can't really rationalize it in any way.
Well, more than that though, like I do believe he's God, but on the other hand, when he came down to earth, what the Bible says is that he emptied himself of his godliness. So whatever miracles he was doing, he wasn't doing on his own power, which is why he needed to go and pray and separate himself to be able to do these things. Like, nothing he was doing was he doing on his own power. So the Bible does say he emptied himself while he was on this planet. It's not like he was God while he was on this planet, if that makes sense.
That does.
I know it's hard to make sense of that.
I guess we're gonna get to Pascal's wager now, and basically Pascal's
Okay.
wager was that I don't remember who's the Pascal in Pascal's wager. Is that the guy who
I
invented
have
the
no idea.
the milk? The yeah. No, that was Pasteur who did the milk thing, not Pascal. But
One of the things I dislike most about Christian apologists is whenever they make bad arguments. And it really, really annoys me because I do think that Christianity can be defended from a logical standpoint. And I do believe you can make good arguments. And you can also make really dumb arguments. And I think Pascal's wager is one of the dumber arguments. Okay, so it's saying you're better off to make a bet. All right. So the problem with that is you would have to assume that you missing on the bet would be an actual better outcome than not betting at all. So, for example, let's just say, for example, that let's say uh, Islam is correct. Well, I've bet on Christianity. Maybe the Allah is going to punish me worse now because I made the wrong bet. It's not really. It's like if I were to argue, I would say this: hey, your best bet. Let's say the Powerball gets to like $1 billion, and then you say, well, your best bet is if you want to win that Powerball is that you mortgage your house and you buy a bunch of tickets. But the reality is that that might actually be a worse outcome than not playing at all. I would say this: if my rebutting and my presenting a better argument for than Pascal's wager is because ultimately you're presenting it as a bet. And I do think ontologically, Christianity has a much better foundation to at least be a provable experiment. Okay. Because you can engage in this experiment one way or the other. So I'm saying it's more, think of it more of as a scientific terms. You can't say, hey, look, I can read this Bible, I can make these prayers, I can go on fasting, and I can actually pursue after God, not from what my pastor tells me, not from what my, someone on the TV or Donald Trump or my parents, not what anybody tells me, but I'm actually going to pursue this God myself and ask him to reveal himself to me. So that's one way. And I think, at least ontologically, you cannot do that. There's no experiment, there's no meditation, there's no prayer you could ever do that would prove atheism to be true one way or the other. You're kind of just shooting in the dark as far as I'm concerned.
So
Do you
to prove atheism to be true, that's a weird thing to say, right? Ultimately, there's nothing true for atheism to prove, right? There's nothing for atheism to prove. That's like saying that I need to prove that leprechauns aren't real. There's nothing to prove there, right? What needs to be proved is if leprechauns are real. I can say with a pretty good degree of certainty that leprechauns aren't real. Maybe leprechauns are real. Who knows? But so far, we have no reason to actually believe that leprechauns are real. So why would I believe in leprechauns? That's the whole falsibility thing about it. It's like the claim of God existing just can't be falsified. There's no way to falsify it, right? There's no way to falsify that. There's no way to falsify that leprechauns don't exist. There's no way to falsify that, you know, all kinds of things don't exist. Aliens, right, don't exist, right? You can prove that aliens do exist, but so far we don't have that. When it comes to aliens, we can say, okay, well, we know that there are planets around other stars, and it's highly likely that they're habitable. It's highly likely that life emerged on those planets, so it's likely that aliens are real. But let's get back to Pascal's wager, right? Basically, I stated it before. Okay. It's just the idea is, why not believe in God? If you don't believe in God and you turn out to be wrong, then you're going to go to hell. But if you do believe in God and you turn out to be wrong, then nothing's going to happen. So it's basically the better bet to believe in God. And I think what you're saying is, well, how do you know what God to believe in? And I imagine this situation where, I die and then I find myself being ferried across the river Styx. Suddenly I'm taken into Tartarus and I'm going, wait, why am I going to, and Tartarus is basically the Greek mythology version of hell. And I'm like, why am I going to hell? Oh, because you denied the gods. You believed in this thing called Jesus and the gods weren't happy about that. So now you're going to hell. And like I said before, to me, it's just a matter of, well, there's not really a way for me to choose whether or not I believe in God. I can say I believe in God, but I'm going to go to hell anyway, because if God is real, he's going to know that that's not true. It's just simply not true. I have to be convinced.
So let's say, for example, we're going to weigh out another religion. Let's say the flying spaghetti monster. Let's say you're praying he's going to touch you with his pasta tentacles and heal you. Okay. So you can believe in that, and you can say, well, this is just as logical as, Jesus, for example. Well, then let's get to the meat and potatoes of where that started from. And when you understand that it started as a kind of like a joke, as a parody, to say, well, how could you disprove this? Then you understand the human origins of it. So I will say this, like, before I was a Christian, I was very, very interested in different religions. And I have, as I think I've told you, I have pretty much all the world religions tattooed on my body because I was so fascinated at the psychology, the anthropology of understanding why people would, for instance, carve a totem pole or pray to a frog or a rock, the animism of the Native Americans. Like, why were people searching for this meaning? And that's one of those things that absolutely mystified me. And it's something that I put a lot of research and time into trying to figure that out. So I think the fact that many, many cultures have believed in, let's say, for example, UFOs, I might think those are from visitors from another dimension, maybe from like a spiritual side. Because even if you look at the Bible, even the book of Ezekiel describes what I think any objective observer would see as some kind of UFO. I mean, it sounds very similar to the descriptions we've heard about UFOs. So I would say maybe it's probably from a spiritual realm, either heaven or hell or some kind of spiritual, entity. And so, and by definition, by the way, those would be aliens. In fact, even by definition, Jesus would be an alien because he would not have been from this planet. On the other side of that, I think, well, there's billions and billions and billions of galaxies and likely millions, maybe even billions of planets. Why would God not also create another life form? What audacity, I would have to think, as Christians, human beings would be the only creation that God wanted to reveal himself through, you know?
Do you know what I think UFOs are? I think they're unidentified flying objects. Basically, somebody saw something, and then whatever the conclusion that they draw from whatever it is that they saw, they used a leap of imagination, basically. And people say, oh, they're obvious. They have to be aliens. Like, well, there's just no way to make that conclusion. And there's more reasonable explanations here that there's something else going on that, you know, you may want to say that you know what that is based on something that you can imagine what it could possibly be, but just because it could possibly be those things doesn't mean that that's what it is. And I find it to be unlikely to be anything other than, maybe some
Okay.
sort of uh, aircraft or something that we haven't seen before, or you know what I'm saying?
What reasonable explanation would you have as an atheist on why every culture has thought of some perception of God that is spanned millennia and often depict and talk about very similar things, such as creation, the flood, and some kind of visitors coming down from heaven in various forms, whether it's like hybrid monkeys or hybrid between fish, like in Egypt where they had birds and jackals. So, where do you think the source of all that comes from? And why have so many different cultures imagined? And if you're talking about modern day seeing flying saucers, I would understand that. But now go back 5,000 years ago, where the Samaritans are actually showing flying saucers and they're depicting men with spacesuits and also having knowledge about the universe, such as the fact that there's 9 planets in the solar system. How could you reasonably think that they could come to that conclusion?
Well, I think what you're talking about there is a very modern interpretation of stories of long ago. Obviously, they didn't think that they were space suits or alien spaceships from other planets. And as far as how uh, lots of different cultures have these stories, we have a tendency to want to
Mm-hmm.
have explanations for what's going on, things that we see. We we tend to not like see something like you know, what looks like eyes looking at us inside of a bush. We tend to want to say there's something there, there's somebody looking at us, we're not going to tend to say, oh no, that's just a weirdly shaped tree. That's probably just a weirdly shaped tree I'm looking at. We've evolved to want to
Mm-hmm.
see, other minds behind things. We have evolved to, flee prey. We deal with other creatures that could be attacking us, or could be that could be encountering us that we have never encountered before. As far as this idea that multiple cultures have stories of flying saucers, I really think a lot of that is creative license being taken by TV show writers, and a tendency for us to have a modern interpretation for what really is stories that have not really that many commonalities. The idea that there is a mind behind anything that's not human is sort of a human tendency. It's a human tendency to want to anthropomorphize things in the world, to see a mind, to see a mind, and to
Mm-hmm.
see some sort of purpose behind it. It's basically a product of our evolution.
So I had specifically mentioned the Sumerians, and you were saying that that was a modern interpretation or whatever, flying saucers. But they specifically talk about the Anunnaki coming down and teaching them things,
Right.
and about them being from other planets.
Mm-hmm.
And so
But were they
that
other
is not a
planets,
modern
or
interpretation.
were they
That's
other
them telling
planets?
us what they believed.
Are you sure it was other planets though? Was it other? Because there's lots of myths about there being other worlds out there other than the world we live on. Different planes of existence or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And and
Uh-huh.
obviously you go out in the desert, you look up in the sky, and it's not hard to make a huge leap. There is something exotic going on out there. So my tendency is to not conclude that people were actually contacted by alien visitors.
So
And the fact is that if that was true, where are they now? We have this technology now to look out into space and actually detect other civilizations. And there's this thing called, I think it's called the Fermi paradox, that basically says we should be hearing something by now, but so far it's silent.
right, but Rob, let me ask you a question. Do you know how the scientists, when they just say they discovered new planets, do you know the method in which they say they discovered that planet?
They have several methods. A common method is to view basically the dimming of a star when a planet passes in front of a star between us and another star.
Right.
It dims at a particular
Right.
amount
Absolutely.
that basically shows that there's something orbiting around that star. We now have direct observation of other planets. We have telescopes that are now powerful enough to actually see other planets actually forming around other stars. We can't see them as well as the planets that are in our own solar system, obviously, but we definitely see them there. Another method is they can detect the slight wobble of a star, that another body revolving around that star has a gravitational tug on the star, and so it actually makes the star wobble just a little bit in a detectable amount.
The point in telling you that is, with both of those observations, you can't see the planet directly. You're observing its impact on another celestial star. Okay, do you know what dark matter is?
Well, nobody knows what that is. Nobody knows what dark matter is. But
exactly.
But I know what it means. I don't know what
exactly. That's the point. Is that nobody knows what dark matter is, though. That's the problem.
So what's your point?
I mean, we can maybe say it's maybe black holes. The point is that you cannot make certain observations, and when you think that we have a very good understanding of what else is in the universe, For example, here's another one. Scientists don't even know what kind of galaxy we live in ourselves,
What do you mean?
because our telescopes are like, metaphorically speaking, we're seeing the forest from the trees, or we're incapable of seeing the forest from the trees. So we can make very good observations about other galaxies. But if you get down to the scientists, they'll have to say, well, this is a guess on how wide we think, given the star distribution of other galaxies we're observing, what might be where we are in the Milky Way and our position, and so on. So anyway, the point being is that there's a lot of blind spots in observing the universe, and we have a still very small, limited understanding of what is potentially out there.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
Well, of course, that's the nature of science. We only have so much pieces of the puzzle, but sometimes you have enough pieces of the puzzle to know what the picture looks like. You have enough pieces of the puzzle to know what the picture is probably going to be. You have pieces, okay, oh, I see,
Right.
even though there's a big gap right there, I see that this is a picture of a cat, right? So I can definitely make the definitive judgment that this puzzle is a picture of a cat, even though I'm missing all these pieces. I have enough pieces there to tell
Right.
me, based on my observation of other puzzles that have been pictures of cats, and that I know what a cat looks like, then I can definitely say that this puzzle, even
Right.
though it's missing half of its pieces, is a picture of a cat.
So one of my points in talking about some of these other cultures or societies, and also some mythologies, et cetera, is because I do think that this proves that there is something out there that has visited us in at different times. For example, if you take a look at the Old Testament, I've already referenced what one of those things would be like. I can't imagine how angels would or wouldn't be traveling through dimensions or through space, but it does seem as though they describe some kind of flying saucer. One. The other thing, too, is that the Bible establishes that some kind of beings came down to earth and did started to intermarry and interbreed with human beings. So it would make sense that their offsprings might be something that the Bible describes as being maybe some kind of hybrid, in which people who were observing them might think that they were gods because they either had supernatural power, or who knows, maybe they were giants. Even within the Old and New Testament, the book of John, the last words of John in describing Jesus' life is that he says, we do not know everything that Jesus did in his life, because, we have 4 books, but a lot of the books are repetitive, and you're trying to cover 3 years of, actually 33 years of his life. And as it is, there's a 20-year gap between the time that Jesus was 12 years old and the time that he was 30 before he starts doing anything. So there's this giant gap where we just simply do not know what was happening.
Uh-huh.
And we know that there's other stuff also happening.
Yes.
So I think that's where some humility comes in saying, I don't have the full story. I know he changed my life. I know he saved me. And I know that he cured the illness that was inside of myself. So that's where like my faith comes in. I do like to entertain some things and think about them, but I think ultimately nothing I would ever say to you or any other person would or could convince you to become a Christian. It's one of those things that you have to experience for yourself. And there's an avenue to do that. And this is why, again, I think ontologically, philosophically, even if it's not true, let's just say for a second, it's not true, you can at least have an experiment to prove whether it is or it isn't true. It has a more logical basis than atheism, in my humble opinion.
I think Jesus in that time that we don't know, that we don't have an account of, I think he visited other planets and got special special treatment from aliens on a exotic spaceship. He went on a cruise. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe we should just get to trivia now, huh? What do you say? All right, kids, get ready. We're going to challenge each other with some trivia. We're going to see who's smarter, an atheist or a hardcore believer.
We're not here to outdo each other. This is kind of something we're doing just to kind of break the tension of what we are talking about. And we both have tremendous respect for each other's intelligence, and we don't want to one-up each other. But on the other hand, we are challenging each other to think about different things. So I know I've certainly learned a lot from these little quizzes that we've done to each other. I've learned some new things, so I'm very grateful for that. So I want to thank you for this exercise, Rob.
Speak for yourself. I'm here to crush you. Mickey Mouse wasn't actually fully created by Walt Disney. He was created by Walt Disney's partner when he first started off. Who was that guy? What was his name?
Okay, I'm going to tell you why you have a clear advantage in this area, because you got me with Goofy. But you have a, 4-year-old child?
Yeah, he's almost 4. He's going to be 4 next week, actually.
My daughter's only, she's not quite 3. So I have not had to do the dreaded task of watching childhood movies and cartoons. So I'm not looking forward to that. But I think since you got me with Goofy last week, you're going to kill me as far as this goes. But I don't know. I'm trying to stall.
The answer, his name is Ub Iwerks, and he had an early fallout with Disney after having creative differences, but he later came back with the Disney company and became one of the most innovative animators in motion picture history. So,
what was the name of the Soviet-era leader of Romania who was killed on air with his wife?
I have no idea.
Nikolai Ceausescu.
All right, well, since we're talking about space and planets and stuff, Pluto, of course, we grew up understanding it as the 9th planet of the solar system. Now we know that it's not, in fact, a planet. Right. It's a dwarf planet, and it's also one of many objects in this particular system of icy objects. What is this system of icy objects called?
I don't know.
It's called the Kuiper Belt, and it includes many other
Kuiper Belt.
It includes many other discovered dwarf planets.
Name all 3 permanent members of Nirvana at the time of the lead singer's death. Bonus point for the traveling guitarist who was also part of the band. All 3 members.
Okay, well, there's Kurt Cobain, there's Dave Grohl.
Okay.
And I always forget the name of the bassist. But
maybe I'll give you half of a point for that one, because you did get 2.
I think that the guitarist that you're talking about is that Pat Smear?
Pat Smear? Okay, yeah. So he was also a guitarist with Foo Fighters. So, all right, I'll give you that one. You got the point there.
Okay.
The bassist was Kurt Novosek.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. I don't think I ever bothered to even learn his name.
Right. That's 1 point. All right.
Well, since you asked me a band question.
Well, that's my favorite band of all time, so there's no way I'm not going to not know that one.
My favorite band of all time, Metallica.
Pantera.
Pantera.
If I had to guess your favorite band, it would have been Pantera.
Oh, okay. I enjoy some of their songs.
Okay, let's hear it.
I'm not a huge Pantera fan, actually, but Metallica is my jam. And just before Metallica went to record their first album, Kill 'Em All, they decided that they were going to fire their lead guitarist and get a new lead guitarist. This lead guitarist later went on to form his own famous band, metal band. So either name the guitarist or name the band he went to form.
I like a few Metallica songs. but I'm definitely not a Metallica fan. It's Metallica like tips this scale on what I like as far as music because they're just tiny bit too hard for me. Like Nirvana is favorite band of all time, but Metallica just slightly tips it. But I see if I have to take a guess about a band, if you're giving me Black Sabbath, I don't know.
Oh man. All right. I will say that I love Nirvana too. I think Nirvana is one of the greatest bands ever. Um, but the guitarist is Dave
The greatest
Mustaine.
band ever. Correction.
The guitarist is Dave Mustaine, and the band he went to form on was Megadeth.
I could do a little punk, I could do a little screamo, a little emo, but if I think out of like if 10 I could tolerate like a 10, they're like right at 11. They're just a little bit too hard for me. But they're still decent. They're obviously legends. So. Name the two most popular mosques in Istanbul, Turkey, which were both featured on the movie Taken Part 2.
You got me on this one, boss.
Did you hear that?
I wouldn't be able to name a mosque to save my life.
Okay, so these mosques are directly across from each other. The first one is called the Hagia Sophia, which was converted from a Christian church. And on the other side of that is called the Blue Mosque. I did wind up taking a picture I had this camera that was able to take 360 shots. So I have one shot of me standing right in the middle and both of the mosque in one shot. It's absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, mosques are beautiful buildings. I love great architecture. Which famous late night talk show host used to be a writer for The Simpsons uh, in its earliest run?
Seth Meyers.
Seth
Seth
Meyers?
Meyers.
Well, that is incorrect. Seth Meyers, I don't know if he was a writer for The Simpsons or not. And that's the thing about The Simpsons is like they the Simpsons are still going. They've been on forever. It's been on forever. But during the earliest years,
Right.
Conan O'Brien was a writer, and he wrote some of the most popular episodes.
This Spike Lee film starring Josh Brolin is a remake of a popular South Korean movie directed by famed director Park Chan-wook, whose works include Sympathy for Lady Vengeance, I'm a Cyborg, but That's Okay, and his English debut.
The only Spike Lee films I can think of the titles of is Do the Right Thing and Jungle Fever, and I know those are not the right answers.
Yeah, you probably couldn't be possibly be any further off.
Right.
But the movie is called Old Boy, and it's part of a Vengeance trilogy. If you've not seen the South Korean movie, I highly recommend you watching it.
Okay. I haven't seen Old Boy either, but I'm familiar with it though.
Oh God, you really should watch it.
What was the name of the first successful American settlement?
Jonesburg.
Oh, close. It's Jamestown.
What are the two most famous texts in the Hindu religion?
In the Hindu, okay. It's let's see. I always get the pronunciations bad. The the Bhagavad Gita, the Inagata Davida baby.
Okay.
The Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
And
So the other one is the Vedas. The Vedas.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. So you win this week, and
yeah. Go me.
I
right?
will enact my revenge next week.
This was terrible.
All right. So it's time for your sermon, Rob.
Here we go. My first sermon ever. This is going to be something else. All right, friends.
Let's hear it. I'm excited.
My friends of the RHE listenership, if anybody's listening out there, hear me now. Socrates once said, I know that I know nothing. And the punk rock band Operation Ivy said, all I know is that I don't know. All I know is that I don't know nothing. And so I guess that the reason I want to bring that up is because when it comes to what we believe, knowledge is something that you just can't take for granted. Because how do we know anything anyway? We have to, we can look, we can feel, we can touch the chair and the tables in front of us, and we can say, obviously, I know what reality is, but do you really know what reality is? How do you know your senses are telling you what's true? The thing is that recent findings in neuroscience is kind of showing that our brains are kind of making it up as it goes. It's kind of making a simulation of our world. Now, the closer we are to the things that we're experiencing, the better the simulation gets. But like a video game, there's a draw distance. And your brain is kind of just taking what it can and filling in the gaps. So, is what we know, or is everything just belief? And that's just a question I want everybody to ask themselves. Because everyone is convinced that what is true, what they think is true. But we're always running into these crises of faith. And when you come to understand that you're always making leaps of faith, then you can understand where other people are coming from with their beliefs. The thing about where people are coming from is that belief is identity. When people believe something, when people say this is me, this is what I believe, this is what's true, they're telling us something about themselves. Tradition runs deep. Families run deep. We all have only what's in front of us to go on, to really know what's true. So just keep an open mind. The hardest thing to believe in is yourself and each other. But I think that's the most important thing to do. Whether you believe in God or you're just not convinced, just look around you, see what's in front of you, see that other people are floating around in this ocean, trying to gather up and figure it out, and help each other. Help each other do that. Don't stop trying to drown each other in this ocean we're all floating in. Help each other up. Grab hands. Whether you say, whether you think what's true or not, we all need each other. So we're all looking for the thing that tells us that this is real. And we're all looking for the thing that gives us meaning. And that's all I got to say.
I think the only thing missing, Rob, was an altar call and passing around the offering plate. And I thought that would have been a complete sermon.
Thank you very much.
But, as much as I wanted to defend everything about Christianity today, I just basically had to say there's some things that I really don't know for sure. And it is my desire to articulate the faith in a logical way. But on the same time, I do recognize the analogy I always give is that if I walked into a movie theater and I was looking with a straw, and I got to see the corner of the credits for 1 second, that would be more or less what I'm able to experience in the universe and in the vastness of billions of years. And so I get to see things for a quick second. So the likelihood that I'm going to figure out everything is pretty small. So that's how I like to think about, and it keeps me reliant upon God and Jesus Christ to reveal things to me and to strengthen me when I'm weak.
All right, I think that wraps it up. And I hope we did this with respect, humility, and empathy. And my name is Rob Schock.
This is Isaiah Diesel. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.